Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
First, a word from our sponsor. The Daily Compliance News for March 11, 2022, the Enablers Edition. We begin with that story from the New York Times about how Western firms have quietly enabled Russian oligarchs and the fallout for those firms. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to them along the lines of those who enabled Jeffrey Epstein and, of course, going back, Bernie Madoff and his fraudulent activities. But the company or the article names Concord Management, a financial advisory firm in Tarrytown, New York, which has been used to secretly invest money in large U.S. hedge funds and private equity funds. Of course, offshore accounts and shell corporations are used. There are certain law firms that are named in the article as well, both those having offices in Russia and those who have done business for the oligarchs here in the United States. It even names refers to a former Treasury official turned lobbyist who argued to the White House in a letter that Russia's Sovcombank shouldn't face sanctions because of the bank's commitment to gender, environment, and social responsibility. So a big change coming for the enablers, and we'll see if Congress follows up on legislation. Next up, from the Crux, a website entitled Taking the Catholic Pulse, first-time contributor to the Daily Compliance News. The Cameroonian Archbishop Samuel Kleda of Douala claims Cameroon is being stripped of its natural resources by corrupt officials. Claims that bad governance and corrupt officials are really demineralizing and de-assetizing the country. So corruption claimed in the Cameroon. Next up from the Wall Street Journal, Risk and Compliance Journal, Richard Vandeford reporting a third BitMex founder pleads guilty to AML violations. Samuel Reed is the third company founder to enter a guilty plea with U.S. prosecutors over cryptocurrency derivatives exchanges, money laundering failures. Boy, that's a mouthful. And agreed to a $10 million fine as well as pleading guilty. As mentioned, he's the third founder of the business to reach a plea deal. Mr. Reed is the longtime CTO of BitMex and entered his plea in federal court in Manhattan this week. And finally, one of the things that compliance officers need to be aware of are democratic regime changes, because that often leads to changes in the anti-corruption landscape. And Bloomberg reports that the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan is widely seen, who is widely and closely allied with the country's military, now appears to have lost some of the backing of his constituents as well as his political allies. This could well portend a change at the top, and as I said, when you have a change at the top, often the new bosses go after the old bosses for corruption. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.